Miss Eliza Bennet had always known her worth would be measured in pounds and shillings rather than love and devotion, but she never imagined she would be bartered away like livestock to settle her father's gambling debts. The Duke of Ravenshollow was a name whispered in drawing rooms with equal parts fascination and horror, a man whose legendary beauty was matched only by his legendary destruction, whose fortune was as vast as his reputation was ruined. They said he drank himself senseless every night, that his estate was a monument to decay, that 3 wives had already fled his cruelty or died under mysterious circumstances. As Eliza's carriage rolled through the iron gates of Ravenshollow Manor on a rain-soaked October evening, she prepared herself to become the 4th casualty of Victor Harrington's darkness. What she found instead was a man drowning not in vice, but in a grief so profound it had consumed everything he once was. The Duke who was supposed to destroy her was already destroyed himself, and the woman who was meant to be his victim was about to become his salvation. In the shadows of a cursed estate, 2 broken souls would discover that sometimes the most unlikely marriages forge the strongest bonds, and that redemption can bloom even in the darkest soil, if one has the courage to plant seeds of hope where others see only ruin. The rain hammered against the windows of the Bennet family's modest townhouse in Bath as Eliza stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her childhood bedroom. At 23, she possessed a quiet beauty that had never quite bloomed into the fashionable prettiness that caught husbands in London ballrooms. Her chestnut brown hair fell in gentle waves around a heart-shaped face marked by intelligent hazel eyes and a stubborn chin that had gotten her into trouble more times than she cared to count. Tonight, that stubborn chin trembled slightly as she contemplated her fate. "Eliza!" Her father's voice boomed from downstairs, slurred with the brandy that had become his constant companion since their financial ruin began. "Come down here, girl. His Grace wishes to meet his bride." Eliza closed her eyes and took a steadying breath. 3 hours ago, she had been a spinster resigned to caring for her aging parents and managing their dwindling household. Now she was the promised wife of the Duke of Ravenshollow, sold to settle debts that totaled more than most people saw in a lifetime. The negotiation had been swift and brutal. Her father, Sir Edmund Bennet, had gambled away not only his own modest fortune, but had borrowed heavily against expectations that never materialized. When the creditors came calling, demanding immediate payment, he had only one asset left to offer: his unmarried daughter. Duke Victor Harrington had arrived that afternoon like a dark angel of deliverance, his reputation preceding him like a storm cloud. Eliza had watched from the stairs as he entered their drawing room, tall and imposing despite the obvious effects of drink, his black hair disheveled and his dark blue eyes holding a coldness that made her shiver. His clothes were expensive but wrinkled, his cravat askew, and there was something in his bearing that spoke of a man who had stopped caring about appearances long ago. The conversation had been conducted in low, urgent tones, but Eliza had caught enough to understand the terms. Her father's debts, some £15,000, would be cleared in exchange for her hand in marriage. No courtship, no consideration of her feelings, no pretense of affection. She was a commodity being traded to satisfy a debt, nothing more. "Ah, she's well bred," her father had said, as if discussing a horse at market. "Be educated, accomplished in the usual arts. She'll make a suitable duchess." The Duke had barely glanced in her direction when she was summoned to be presented. His assessment had been swift and dismissive, his nod of acceptance perfunctory. "The wedding will take place in 3 days," he had announced. "She'll come to Ravenshollow immediately afterward." And that had been that. 23 years of life reduced to a business transaction. Now, as Eliza made her way downstairs for what would likely be her final conversation with her future husband before their wedding, she steeled herself for whatever fresh humiliation awaited. She found him in her father's study, a glass of brandy in his hand, and another already empty on the desk beside him. In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly than she had that afternoon. Victor Harrington was perhaps 35, with the kind of dark, brooding handsomeness that had probably broken hearts before it had been ravaged by whatever demons drove him to drink. His face was lean and aristocratic, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw that might have been carved from marble, but there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, and a pallor that suggested he spent little time in sunlight. "Ah, Miss Bennet," he said without rising, his voice cultured but rough around the edges. "Come to inspect your purchase, have you?" The crude comment stung, but Eliza lifted her chin defiantly. "I believe, Your Grace, that you are the one who has made a purchase. I am merely the goods being delivered." Something flickered in his dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or amusement. "Sharp tongue," he observed. "I hope you don't expect me to blunt it with kindness." "I expect nothing from you, Your Grace," Eliza replied evenly. "Save perhaps that you honor the agreement that has been made." "Honor," Victor repeated, taking a long drink from his glass. "An interesting choice of words. Tell me, Miss Bennet, what do you know of honor?" "I know that it requires keeping one's word," Eliza said, "and treating others with basic human decency, regardless of the circumstances that bring them together." Victor laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Human decency. How refreshingly naive. You'll learn soon enough that such luxuries are rarely afforded to wives, particularly wives who come with debts attached. Eliza felt her temper flare. "And you'll learn, Your Grace, that I am not some cowering miss who will accept cruelty simply because it comes with a title. You may have bought my hand in marriage, but you have not bought my spirit." For a moment, Victor stared at her with something that might have been respect. Then he drained his glass and stood, swaying slightly as he did so. "Spirit," he said softly. "How long do you think that will last at Ravenshollow, I wonder? The last Duchess lasted 6 months before she fled back to her family. The one before that, well, she didn't flee at all." The implied threat hung in the air between them, but Eliza refused to be intimidated. "Perhaps," she said quietly, sure they simply lacked the proper motivation to stay. And what motivation might that be? "The knowledge that running away solves nothing," Eliza replied, "that some battles are worth fighting, even when the odds seem impossible." Victor studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You think you can save me, Miss Bennet? Reform the dissolute Duke through the power of wifely devotion?" "I think, Your Grace, that you are not nearly as lost as you pretend to be," Eliza said boldly. "And I think that beneath all that brandy and bitterness, there might still be a man worth knowing." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, Eliza thought she saw something vulnerable flicker across Victor's features. Then his mask slipped back into place, cold and impenetrable. "You'll be disappointed," he said flatly. "I am exactly what I appear to be, a drunk, a wastrel, and a man who has forgotten how to feel anything but contempt for the world and everyone in it." "Then I suppose we'll find out together, won't we?" Eliza replied. Victor moved toward the door, pausing only to look back at her with an expression that might have been pity. "3 days, Miss Bennet. Enjoy your last taste of innocence. Ravenshollow has a way of destroying such pretty illusions." After he left, Eliza sank into a chair, her hands trembling slightly as the magnitude of her situation truly hit her. In 3 days, she would be married to a man who seemed determined to be her enemy. She would leave behind everything familiar and safe to live in a place that even its owner described as destructive. But as she sat in the gathering darkness, Eliza found herself thinking not of Victor's threats, but of that brief moment when his mask had slipped. Whatever had driven him to drink and despair, whatever had turned him into the bitter man who had sat across from her tonight, she sensed that it was pain rather than inherent cruelty that motivated him. And if it was pain, then perhaps it could be healed. The thought was probably foolish, certainly naive, but it was all she had to cling to as she faced an uncertain future. In 3 days, she would become the Duchess of Ravenshollow. What happened after that would depend on whether she could find the courage to look past the monster Victor Harrington pretended to be and reach the man he might still become. The Bride of Ravenshollow. The wedding took place on a grey November morning in the small parish church where Eliza had been christened 23 years earlier. It was a cheerless affair, attended only by her parents, a handful of local gentry who came more out of morbid curiosity than genuine well-wishes, and Victor himself, who arrived precisely on time, but clearly already under the influence of whatever he had been drinking that morning. Eliza wore her mother's wedding dress, altered hastily to fit her slighter frame. The ivory silk had yellowed with age, and the Brussels lace was fragile, but it was the finest thing she owned. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she caught sight of Victor waiting at the altar and felt her breath catch. Despite his obvious intoxication, he was magnificent. He wore a perfectly tailored black morning coat with a silver waistcoat and pristine white cravat, his dark hair combed back in a style that emphasized the aristocratic angles of his face. But it was his eyes that held her attention, those dark blue depths that seemed to hold secrets she couldn't begin to fathom. The ceremony itself was brief and impersonal. Victor spoke his vows in a clear, steady voice that betrayed nothing of his inner thoughts, while Eliza tried to inject some meaning into words that felt hollow and strange on her tongue. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Victor's kiss was perfunctory, a mere brush of lips that held no warmth or promise. "Well, Duchess," he murmured against her ear as they signed the register, "a welcome to your new life." The wedding breakfast was an equally stilted affair, with forced conversation and nervous laughter from the few guests who had been invited. Eliza found herself watching Victor throughout the meal, noting how he barely touched his food, but refilled his wineglass repeatedly. Her new husband was a study in controlled dissolution, maintaining the facade of a gentleman, even as he systematically numbed himself with alcohol. When it came time to leave for Ravenshollow, Eliza's mother embraced her with tears in her eyes. "Be careful, my dear," she whispered. "Remember that you always have a home here if things become unbearable." But Eliza knew that wasn't true. Her father's debts had been paid, but only barely, and there was no money to support a daughter who fled an inconvenient marriage. This was her life now, for better or worse. The journey to Ravenshollow took 4 hours through increasingly desolate countryside. Victor rode alongside the carriage rather than sharing it with her, leaving Eliza alone with her thoughts and growing apprehension. As the miles passed, the landscape became wilder and more forbidding, with ancient forests pressing close to the road and mist rising from hidden valleys. When Ravenshollow Manor finally came into view, Eliza understood why Victor had spoken of it with such bitterness. The house was magnificent, a sprawling Elizabethan manor with soaring towers and elaborate stonework, but it had an air of abandonment that was deeply unsettling. Many of the windows were shuttered, the gardens were overgrown, and there was a general sense of decay that spoke of years of neglect. "Welcome to your new home, Your Grace," said the butler, who greeted them at the front door. He was an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle manner that seemed at odds with the grim atmosphere of the house. "Thank you," Eliza began. "Whitmore, Your Grace. I've been in service to the Harrington family for 40 years. "Whitmore will see you to your rooms," Victor said curtly, already heading toward what Eliza assumed was his study. "Dinner is at 8. Try not to get lost. The house has a way of swallowing people who wander too far from the main corridors." With that cheerful warning, he disappeared, leaving Eliza standing in the vast entrance hall with only the butler for company. "If I may, Your Grace," Whitmore said gently, "might I suggest we begin with a tour of the house? It's quite large, and it can be overwhelming at first." Eliza nodded gratefully, and for the next hour, Whitmore led her through a maze of corridors, drawing rooms, libraries, and galleries. Ravenshollow was indeed magnificent, with soaring ceilings, elaborate plasterwork, and priceless works of art. But it was also eerily quiet, with dust sheets covering much of the furniture and a pervasive sense of emptiness that made Eliza's footsteps echo hollowly on the marble floors. "How many servants are there?" she asked as they climbed a grand staircase toward the family quarters. "Fewer than there once were," Whitmore admitted diplomatically. "His Grace has simplified the household in recent years. We manage with a skeleton staff. Myself, Mrs. Crawford the housekeeper, cook, and a handful of maids and footmen." "And the previous duchesses?" Eliza asked, unable to suppress her curiosity about the women who had come before her. Whitmore's expression grew carefully neutral. The first Duchess, Lady Margaret, was his Grace's childhood sweetheart. She died in a riding accident 2 years after their marriage. The second, Lady Catherine, found life at Ravenshollow, difficult, and returned to her family after 6 months. The third, Lady Isabel, died of a fever last winter. 3 wives in less than 10 years. Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty corridors. "And His Grace?" she asked quietly. Has he always been?" His Grace was once a very different man," Whitmore said carefully. "Before Lady Margaret's death, he was known for his kindness, his intelligence, his dedication to his estates and tenants. The tragedy changed him profoundly." They had reached the Duchess's chambers, a suite of rooms that had clearly once been beautiful but now felt abandoned and melancholy. The furniture was covered in dust sheets, the curtains were drawn, and there was a mustiness in the air that spoke of long disuse. "I'll have the maids air out the rooms and make them comfortable for you," Whitmore promised. "Mrs. Crawford will be up shortly to discuss household arrangements." After he left, Eliza stood alone in what would be her sitting room, trying to imagine making a life in this beautiful, haunted place. Through the tall windows, she could see the overgrown gardens stretching toward a lake that gleamed like pewter in the fading light. It should have been lovely, but there was something profoundly sad about the neglected beauty, as if the house itself was mourning. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and a middle-aged woman entered with a curtsy. "Your Grace, I'm Mrs. Crawford, the housekeeper. I've come to see what you might need to make yourself comfortable, Mrs." Crawford was a practical woman with greying hair and intelligent eyes, and Eliza found herself grateful for her no-nonsense manner. "Thank you, Mrs. Crawford. I confess, I'm rather overwhelmed by it all." "That's perfectly natural, Your Grace. Ravenshollow takes some getting used to. But it's a good house for all its troubles. It just needs attention." "What sort of troubles?" Eliza asked. Mrs. Crawford hesitated, clearly torn between discretion and honesty. "His Grace has been unwell since Lady Margaret's death. The house has suffered from his neglect, as have the estates. Many of the staff left when he stopped taking an interest in proper management, or in the other duchesses. What happened to them, really? Lady Catherine was a gentle soul who couldn't bear his Grace's darkness. She tried to help him, but when he refused her efforts, she gave up and left. Lady Isabel." Mrs. Crawford paused, her expression troubled. Lady Isabel was different. She was ambitious, calculating. She married his Grace for his title and fortune, and when she realized he wouldn't be the compliant husband she expected, she made his life miserable. Her death was a blessing, if I'm being honest. The frank assessment was shocking, but Eliza appreciated the honesty. "And what do you think of my chances?" she asked with a wry smile. Mrs. Crawford studied her for a moment, then smiled in return. "I think, Your Grace, that you might be exactly what this house needs. You have a strength about you that the others lacked, and perhaps you're what His Grace needs as well." Dinner that evening was a formal affair, served in a dining room that could have seated 50 but felt cavernous with only 2 occupants. Victor had changed into evening dress and made an effort to appear sober, though Eliza could see the telltale signs of his continued drinking in the slight tremor of his hands and the careful way he moved. "I trust Whitmore showed you the house?" he asked, as the first course was served. "He did. It's magnificent, though rather quiet." "Very quiet is one word for it," Victor agreed. "Cursed might be another." "Do you really believe that?" Eliza asked. "That the house is cursed?" Victor's laugh was bitter. 3 dead wives might suggest it, don't you think? 2 dead wives," Eliza corrected. "One who left because she couldn't bear to stay. That's tragedy, not a curse. And what would you call it when a 4th wife arrives, bought and paid for like a broodmare?" The crude comparison made Eliza's cheeks burn, but she refused to be baited. "I would call it an opportunity," she said calmly. "An opportunity for what? To prove that not everything at Ravenshollow is destined for tragedy. To show that sometimes even the most unlikely circumstances can lead to something worthwhile." Victor stared at her across the length of the polished table, his expression unreadable. "You're either remarkably naive or remarkably brave, Duchess. I'm not sure which is more dangerous." Perhaps both," Eliza replied. "But I'd rather be dangerous than defeated." For the rest of the meal, they ate in relative silence, but Eliza was aware of Victor watching her with a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been respect. When the last course was cleared, he rose from his chair with the careful movements of a man trying not to reveal his intoxication. "I'll leave you to settle in," he said formally. "My rooms are in the east wing, should you need anything. Though I should warn you, I'm not often fit for company in the evenings." "And in the mornings?" Eliza asked. Victor paused at the door, looking back at her with surprise. "I beg your pardon? Are you fit for company in the mornings? I thought perhaps we might breakfast together, discuss the running of the household, the estates. I am your wife now, after all. I should like to be useful." "Unuseful," Victor repeated, as if the word were foreign to him. "Yes, I have no intention of sitting in my rooms like an ornament, Your Grace. If I'm to be the Duchess of Ravenshollow, then I intend to act like one." Something flickered in Victor's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or the faintest hint of interest. "Very well, Paul," he said finally. "Breakfast is at 9. Try not to be shocked by what you see." After he left, Eliza sat alone in the vast dining room, surrounded by portraits of long-dead Harringtons, who seemed to watch her with disapproving eyes. She had survived her first day as a duchess, but she knew the real test was yet to come. Tomorrow she would begin the work of understanding the man she had married and the house that was now her home. She would start the delicate process of finding her place in a world that seemed designed to reject her. But tonight, for the first time since learning of her fate, Eliza felt a spark of something that might have been hope. Victor Harrington was not the monster she had feared. He was a man in pain, drowning in grief and guilt, lashing out at the world because he didn't know how else to cope with his losses. And if he was in pain, then perhaps he could be healed. The thought was probably foolish, certainly presumptuous, but it was all she had. Tomorrow, she would begin the most important work of her life, not just surviving as the Duchess of Ravenshollow, but finding a way to bring light back to a house that had been shrouded in darkness for far too long. The morning after Eliza woke to grey dawn light filtering through unfamiliar windows and the sound of rain pattering against glass. For a moment she was disoriented, expecting to see the familiar walls of her childhood bedroom. Then memory crashed over her like a cold wave. She was at Ravenshollow, she was married, and she was now the Duchess of a man who seemed determined to drink himself to death. A soft knock at her door announced the arrival of a young maid with a tea tray. "Good morning, Your Grace," the girl said with a nervous curtsy. "I'm Jenny. Mrs. Crawford sent me to see if you needed anything." "And thank you, Jenny. What time is it?" "And just past 8, Your Grace. His Grace usually takes breakfast at 9, though." She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Though what?" Eliza prompted gently. "Well, Your Grace, he's not always. That is, sometimes he's not quite himself in the mornings, after a particularly difficult night." Eliza understood. Victor's drinking was clearly worse than she had realized, if even the servants felt compelled to warn her about his condition. "I see. Well, I shall present myself at 9 regardless. A wife should know her husband in all his moods, don't you think?" Jenny's eyes widened at this pragmatic response, but she bobbed another curtsy. "Yes, Your Grace. Shall I help you dress?" An hour later, Eliza made her way through the labyrinthine corridors to the breakfast room, guided by Whitmore's excellent directions. She had chosen a simple morning dress of deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and she had taken special care with her appearance, instinctively understanding that this first breakfast would set the tone for their future interactions. She found Victor already seated at the table, though none seated was perhaps too generous a term. He was slumped in his chair, his dark hair disheveled, his face pale and drawn. A cup of black coffee sat untouched before him, and he was staring out the window with the blank expression of a man who wished he were anywhere else. "Good morning, Your Grace," Eliza said cheerfully, taking the seat across from him. Victor's head turned slowly toward her, and she saw that his eyes were bloodshot and shadowed with exhaustion. "You're remarkably chipper for someone who's just spent her first night in hell," he said, his voice rough and gravelly. "I slept quite well, actually," Eliza replied, accepting a cup of tea from the hovering footman. "The bed is very comfortable, and the rooms are lovely once the dust sheets are removed." "Oh, how delightfully domestic," Victor muttered, finally reaching for his coffee. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the cup, and Eliza noticed that he had to concentrate to keep from spilling it. "I thought we might discuss the household arrangements," she continued, pretending not to notice his obvious discomfort. "Mrs. Crawford mentioned that the staff has been reduced in recent years. Perhaps we could review what positions need to be filled." Victor looked at her as if she had suggested they sprout wings and fly to London. "You want to discuss household management? At breakfast? While I'm—" He gestured vaguely at himself. "While you're suffering the effects of too much brandy, yes," Eliza said matter-of-factly. "I assume this is your normal condition in the mornings, so we might as well work around it." The blunt assessment seemed to shock Victor into something resembling alertness. "Or you're not going to lecture me about the evils of drink? Plead with me to reform for the sake of our marriage? Would it do any good?" Eliza asked. "Non me dis pas. Then I won't waste my breath, but I will expect you to function as the Duke of Ravenshollow, regardless of your personal habits. This estate employs dozens of people, supports hundreds of tenants, and generates income that affects countless lives. Your drinking is your business, but your responsibilities are mine as well now." Victor stared at her with something approaching amazement. "You're serious?" "Completely. I didn't ask to be your wife, Your Grace, but I am your wife, and I have no intention of presiding over the decline of everything your family has built simply because you've decided to pickle yourself in brandy." For a long moment, Victor said nothing. Then, to Eliza's surprise, he laughed, a rusty sound, as if he hadn't used it in a long time. "My God," he said, shaking his head. "You really are extraordinary. Most women would be weeping into their handkerchiefs by now, or planning their escape back to their families." "I'm not most women," Eliza replied simply. "And I don't have a family to escape to, even if I wanted one. This is my life now, Victor. I intend to make the best of it." The use of his Christian name seemed to surprise him, but he didn't object. Instead, he straightened slightly in his chair and made an effort to focus on her words. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. "A partnership," Eliza said. You handle the aspects of estate management that require your direct authority, meetings with your steward, decisions about major expenditures, correspondence with your peers. I'll handle the household, the social obligations, the day-to-day management that keeps everything running smoothly. And in return, you stop treating me like an unwelcome burden and start treating me like what I am, your Duchess and your partner in maintaining your family's legacy. Victor studied her face with an intensity that made her suddenly self-conscious. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "What did you expect? A timid little mouse who would cower in her rooms and leave me to my self-destruction in peace." "I'm sorry to disappoint you," Eliza said dryly. "Oh, you haven't disappointed me," Victor replied, and for the first time since she'd met him, his smile seemed genuine. "You've terrified me, which is far more interesting." "Good," Eliza said, returning his smile. "Terror is an excellent motivator." They spent the next hour discussing the practical aspects of running Ravens Hollow, and Eliza was surprised to discover that beneath Victor's dissolute exterior lay a sharp intelligence and a deep knowledge of his estates. When he focused on business matters, the tremor left his hands and his voice became steady and authoritative. It was clear that the Duke of Ravenshollow was still there, buried beneath layers of grief and alcohol, but not entirely lost. "The steward, Morrison, comes every Tuesday to review the accounts," Victor explained. "He's a good man, honest and competent, though he's been frustrated by my lack of engagement in recent years." "When did you last tour the estates?" Eliza asked. Victor's expression grew uncomfortable. Not since last spring. I know I should, but—" He trailed off, reaching for his coffee cup again. "But it's difficult to face the tenants when you're not at your best," Eliza finished gently. "Something like that? Then we'll go together," she said decisively. "This week, if the weather permits. I should meet the people who depend on us, and you should see how they're faring." "To Eliza," Victor said, and she noticed that he used her name naturally, without the formal distance of the previous evening. "You don't understand. I can't be the Duke they need me to be. Not anymore." "Why not?" she asked simply. The question seemed to catch him off guard. "Because I'm a drunk. Because I've failed at everything that matters. Because everyone I've ever cared about has died or left me, and I'm tired of pretending that I can be something I'm not." "And what are you then?" Eliza asked. "A disappointment, a waste of a title and a fortune, a man who should have died instead of his wife." The pain in his voice was so raw that Eliza felt her heart clench. "Is that what you really believe?" "Well, it's what I know." Eliza leaned forward, her eyes fixed on his face. "Then let me tell you what I know, Victor. I know that you've been in pain for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to be anything else. I know that you're using alcohol to numb feelings that are too overwhelming to face. And I know that somewhere beneath all that self-loathing is a man who once cared enough about his responsibilities to be considered one of the finest landlords in England." "How could you possibly know that?" Victor asked. "Because Whitmore told me. Because Mrs. Crawford's eyes light up when she talks about the man you used to be. Because even now, drunk and grieving and convinced you're worthless, you still know every detail of your estate's operations." Victor was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. "Margaret used to say things like that," he said finally. "She believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself." "Tell me about her," Eliza said softly. "Why would you want to hear about my first wife?" "Because she was important to you. Because understanding what you've lost might help me understand who you are." Victor looked up at her with surprise, as if the idea of his current wife wanting to know about his past was incomprehensible. "She was perfect," he said slowly. "Beautiful, kind, intelligent. We grew up together. Her father's estate bordered ours. I loved her from the time I was 12 years old, and by some miracle, she loved me back." "What happened?" Eliza asked gently. "She was thrown from her horse while out riding alone. By the time they found her, she was already gone. The doctors said she died instantly, that she wouldn't have suffered, but—" His voice broke slightly. "She was only 24. We'd been married 2 years, and she was everything good in my life." "I'm sorry," Eliza said, and meant it. "That must have been devastating." "It destroyed me," Victor admitted. "I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't bear to be in the same rooms where we'd been happy together. The drinking started as a way to get through the nights, and then it became a way to get through the days, and then it became the only way I knew how to exist." "And the other wives?" Eliza asked carefully. Victor's expression hardened. "Catherine was a mistake. I married her because my family insisted I needed an heir, and she was suitable. But I had nothing left to give her, and she couldn't compete with a ghost. She left after 6 months. and I can't say I blame her. And Isabel? Isabel was a different kind of mistake, Victor said bitterly. She was beautiful and ambitious, and she thought she could manage a grieving widower. When she realized I wasn't going to be the compliant husband she expected, she made my life hell. Her death was a relief. The admission was stark and honest, and Eliza appreciated his candor even as she was troubled by the implications. "And now you have me," she said. "Another wife you didn't choose, thrust upon you by circumstances beyond your control." "And yes," Victor said simply, "and I have no idea what to do with you." "You could try treating me as an ally instead of an enemy," Eliza suggested. "You could let me help you instead of pushing me away. You could accept that while I may not be Margaret, I'm not Catherine or Isabel either." Victor studied her face with that intense gaze she was beginning to recognize. "What do you want from me, Eliza?" "I want you to stop trying to drink yourself to death," she said bluntly. "I want you to remember that you have responsibilities beyond your own grief. I want you to give our marriage a chance to be something more than a business arrangement. And if I can't, if I'm too broken to be the husband you deserve, and then we'll figure it out as we go," Eliza said. "But I won't give up on you, Victor. I won't run away like Catherine, and I won't make your life miserable like Isabel. I'll stay, and I'll fight for you even when you won't fight for yourself." Victor stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached across the table and took her hand in his fingers warm despite the slight tremor that betrayed his condition. "You're either very brave or very foolish," he said softly. "Probably both," Eliza replied, not pulling away from his touch. "But I'd rather be brave and foolish than safe and miserable, and I can't promise to change overnight," Victor warned. "The drinking, the grief, the anger, it's all I've known for years. I don't even remember how to be anything else." "Sue, I'm not asking you to change overnight," Eliza said. "I'm asking you to try. One day at a time, one small step at a time. Will you do that for me? For us?" Victor was quiet for so long that Eliza began to think he wouldn't answer. Then he squeezed her hand gently and nodded. "I'll try," he said. "God help me, I'll try." It wasn't a declaration of love or a promise of immediate transformation, but it was a beginning. And for now, Eliza thought as she squeezed his hand in return, a beginning was enough. The first steps. The change in Victor was subtle at first, so gradual that Eliza sometimes wondered if she was imagining it. But as the days passed, she began to notice small differences that gave her hope. He still drank, that hadn't changed, but he made an effort to be coherent during their morning meetings. He began to take an interest in the estate reports that Morrison brought each Tuesday, asking pointed questions and making decisions that had been deferred for months. Most significantly, he agreed to accompany Eliza on a tour of the tenant farms, their first public appearance together as Duke and Duchess. "Are you certain you're ready for this?" Victor asked as their carriage rolled through the estate gates on a crisp December morning. He was impeccably dressed in a dark blue coat and buff breeches, but Eliza could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands gripped his walking stick. "I'm ready," she assured him. "The question is whether you are." "I haven't spoken to most of these people in over a year," Victor admitted. "They probably think I've forgotten they exist." "And then this is your chance to prove them wrong," Eliza said gently. Their first stop was the home of Thomas Hartwell, a tenant farmer who had worked the same land for 30 years. Eliza watched nervously as Victor climbed down from the carriage, wondering if his resolve would hold when faced with the reality of his neglect. But as soon as Thomas appeared in his doorway, Victor straightened his shoulders and stepped forward with something approaching his old authority. "Hartwell," he said, extending his hand. "It's good to see you. I apologize for my long absence." Thomas, a weathered man in his 50s, looked surprised but pleased. "Your Grace, and your Grace," he added, bowing to Eliza. "Welcome to our humble home." What followed was a revelation for Eliza. Despite his personal struggles, Victor still commanded respect from his tenants, and his knowledge of their individual circumstances was impressive. He remembered Thomas's eldest son, who had joined the army, inquired about his wife's health, and listened attentively to concerns about drainage problems in the lower fields. "We'll have Morrison look into the drainage issue immediately," Victor promised. "And I want you to send word if there are any other problems. I know I've been unavailable, but that's going to change." As they moved from farm to farm, Eliza saw glimpses of the man Victor had once been, decisive, compassionate, genuinely concerned about the welfare of those who depended on him. The tenants responded to his attention with obvious relief and gratitude, and she began to understand why his withdrawal had been so devastating to the community. You're good at this, she told him, as they returned to the carriage after their final visit. I used to be, Victor replied, before I decided that my own misery was more important than everyone else's welfare. But you're being too hard on yourself, Eliza said. Grief makes people do things they wouldn't normally do. What matters is that you're trying to do better now. Because you're making me, Victor said, but there was no resentment in his voice. Left to my own devices, I would have drunk myself into an early grave and let everything fall to pieces. But you didn't, Eliza pointed out. You married me instead. I married you to pay your father's debts, Victor reminded her. Perhaps, Eliza agreed. But you could have chosen any number of ways to handle that situation. You could have simply paid the debts and walked away. Instead, you chose marriage. Why? Victor was quiet for a moment, considering her question. I don't know, he said finally. Maybe because I was tired of being alone. Maybe because some part of me still hoped that I could be saved from myself. And can you be? Eliza asked softly. I'm beginning to think I might be, Victor replied, looking at her with an expression that made her heart skip. If I'm very lucky, and if I don't destroy everything first. That evening, for the first time since their marriage, Victor joined Eliza in the drawing room after dinner, instead of disappearing immediately to his study and his brandy. He still drank. She could smell it on his breath, but he was making an effort to be present, to engage with her as a companion rather than simply enduring her presence. Tell me about your life before Raven's Hollow, he said, settling into the chair across from hers. I know your father gambled away the family fortune, but what was it like growing up? Eliza looked up from her embroidery, surprised by his interest. Quiet, she said. We lived modestly even before the financial troubles began. My father was never particularly ambitious, and my mother was content with domestic life. I had a governess until I was 16, then I helped manage the household and cared for my parents. No seasons in London, no grand balls or marriage prospects. We couldn't afford a London season, Eliza said matter-of-factly, and the local gentlemen weren't particularly interested in a girl with no dowry and no connections. I was resigned to spinsterhood, actually. It seemed preferable to a marriage of convenience. And yet here you are, married to a drunk duke for the sake of £15,000, Victor said wryly. Yes, Eliza agreed, though I'm beginning to think it may not be the disaster I initially feared. What changed your mind? Eliza considered her answer carefully. You did, she said finally. Today, seeing you with your tenants, watching you remember who you used to be, it gave me hope that you might remember how to be that man again. And if I can't, if this is as good as it gets, then it's still better than I expected, Eliza said honestly. You're not the monster I was led to believe, Victor. You're a man in pain, and pain can be healed if you're willing to let it. Victor was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Margaret used to say that too, he said finally. That pain was temporary, that healing was always possible if you were brave enough to try. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. She would have liked you, I think. You have the same kind of quiet strength, the same refusal to give up on lost causes. Am I a lost cause? Eliza asked. No, Victor said, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I am. But you might just be my salvation. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and hope. Eliza felt her heart race as she recognized the shift in their relationship, from reluctant strangers to something that might, with time and patience, become genuine partnership. Oh, Victor, she said softly, I want you to know that I don't expect you to replace what you had with Margaret. I'm not trying to compete with her memory, or take her place in your heart. And then what do you want? He asked. I want to build something new with you, Eliza said. Something that honors what you've lost while still allowing for what we might gain. I want to be your partner, your friend, your ally in rebuilding what grief has torn down. And if, in time, it becomes something more than partnership, Victor asked quietly, then we'll face that when it happens, Eliza replied. But for now, friendship and partnership are enough, more than enough. Victor rose from his chair and moved to the window, staring out at the dark gardens. I haven't been a friend to anyone in years, he said. I'm not sure I remember how. Then we'll learn together, Eliza said, joining him at the window. One day at a time, one small step at a time. Victor turned to look at her, and in the lamplight she could see something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Hope, tentative and fragile, but real nonetheless. You're remarkable, he said softly. I don't deserve you, but I'm grateful you're here. We deserve each other, Eliza corrected. Two people thrown together by circumstances, trying to make the best of an impossible situation. If that's not the foundation for a good marriage, I don't know what is. Victor smiled then, the first genuine smile she had seen from him, and Eliza felt something warm and hopeful bloom in her chest. They had a long way to go, she knew. Victor's drinking was still a problem, his grief was still raw, and there were undoubtedly challenges ahead that she couldn't even imagine. But for the first time since arriving at Ravenshollow, Eliza believed that they might actually succeed in building something worthwhile together. Not the passionate love story that Victor had shared with Margaret, but something equally valuable, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the kind of deep affection that could grow into love if given time and nurturing. As they stood together at the window, looking out at the estate that was now their shared responsibility, Eliza made a silent promise to herself and to the man beside her. She would not give up on Victor Harrington, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. She would stand by him as he fought his demons, support him as he rebuilt his life, and love him in whatever way he was able to accept. The woman who had been given to a drunken duke to pay her family's debts was discovering that sometimes the most unexpected gifts come wrapped in the most unlikely packages. And sometimes, if you're very brave and very patient, you can unwrap those gifts and find treasures beyond your wildest dreams. The turning point. Winter settled over Ravenshollow like a heavy blanket, bringing with it both challenges and unexpected intimacy. The shorter days and longer nights meant that Victor and Eliza spent more time together, and gradually their formal politeness gave way to genuine companionship. Victor's drinking, while still a concern, had become more controlled. He no longer appeared at breakfast in a state of complete intoxication, and he made an effort to limit his consumption during the day. The evenings were still difficult. Old habits died hard, and the darkness seemed to call forth his demons, but even then, he tried to maintain some semblance of functionality. "You're getting better," Eliza observed one morning as they reviewed the household accounts together. "Your hands are steadier, your color is improved, and you haven't fallen asleep in your soup for over a week." Victor looked up from the ledger he was examining, a wry smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Such high praise, Duchess. I'm overwhelmed by your confidence in my progress." "I'm serious," Eliza said, though she was smiling too. "The improvement is noticeable. Mrs. Crawford mentioned that you've been sleeping better as well." "Mrs. Crawford talks too much," Victor muttered, but there was no real annoyance in his voice. "Though she's not wrong, I have been sleeping better. Fewer nightmares." It was the first time he had mentioned the nightmares, and Eliza felt a pang of sympathy for the torment he endured even in sleep. "Do you want to talk about them?" she asked gently. Victor's expression grew guarded. "Not particularly. They're unpleasant. About Margaret, among other things." Victor closed the ledger with more force than necessary. "I'd rather not dwell on the contents of my subconscious, if you don't mind." Eliza recognized the signs of his withdrawal and changed the subject, but she filed the information away for future consideration. Victor's healing would require more than just reducing his alcohol consumption. He would need to confront the grief and guilt that drove him to drink in the first place. Their breakthrough came on a particularly bitter January evening when a winter storm trapped them inside the house for 3 days. By the second night, Victor was restless and agitated, his usual escape routes, long rides, visits to the tenants, even retreats to his study, cut off by the howling wind and driving snow. Eliza found him in the library, pacing before the fire like a caged animal, a glass of brandy in his hand and a nearly empty bottle on the nearby table. "The storm should break by tomorrow," she said, settling into a chair and picking up her needlework as if his obvious distress was perfectly normal. "I can't stand it," Victor said abruptly, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Being trapped in here with nothing but my own thoughts for company. It's driving me mad." "You're not alone," Eliza pointed out calmly. "I'm here." "You don't understand," Victor said, taking a long drink from his glass. "When I can't escape, when I can't ride or work or lose myself in estate business, the memories come back. All of them. Margaret's accident, Catherine's tears when she left, Isabel's accusations, the disappointment in my father's eyes before he died." "Tell me about your father," Eliza said, setting down her needlework and giving him her full attention. Victor stopped pacing and stared at her. "Why would you want to hear about that?" "Because it's clearly troubling you and because I'm your wife. Your burdens are my burdens now, Victor. Let me help carry them." For a moment, Victor looked as if he might refuse. Then, perhaps because the brandy had loosened his tongue, or perhaps because the storm had stripped away his usual defenses, he sank into the chair across from her and began to speak. "My father was everything a duke should be," he said quietly. "Noble, dignified, devoted to duty and tradition. He loved this estate, loved the responsibility of caring for hundreds of families, loved the history and legacy of our name, and I was his heir, his only son, the one who was supposed to carry on everything he had built." "And you did," Eliza said. "From everything I've heard, you were an exemplary duke before Margaret's death." "For a while," Victor agreed. "But my father lived to see me start drinking, to see me withdraw from my responsibilities, to watch me become everything he despised. He died knowing that I was destroying everything he had worked for, and I couldn't even stay sober long enough to properly mourn him." The pain in his voice was so raw that Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "Victor, grief affects people differently. Your father would have understood." "No," Victor interrupted harshly. "He wouldn't have. He told me near the end that I was dishonoring Margaret's memory with my behavior, that she would be ashamed of what I had become. And he was right." "He was wrong," Eliza said firmly. "A man who loved you would never say such cruel things, no matter how disappointed he might be. And Margaret, from everything you've told me about her, she sounds like a woman who would have wanted your happiness above all else." "You didn't know her," Victor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No, I didn't, but I know you, and I know that the man you are, even damaged and grieving, is someone worth loving. If Margaret loved you, then she would want you to heal, to find peace, to honor her memory by living fully rather than dying slowly." Victor was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I dream about the accident," he said. "Every night I see her falling from her horse, hear the sound of her neck breaking, watch the life leave her eyes. But in the dreams, I'm there. I could save her if I just moved fast enough, if I just reached her in time. But I never do. I always fail, and she always dies, and it's always my fault." "It wasn't your fault," Eliza said gently. "Accidents happen, Victor. Terrible, senseless accidents that no one could prevent or predict. I should have been with her," Victor said, his hands clenching into fists. "She asked me to ride with her that morning, but I had estate business to attend to. I chose duty over my wife, and she died alone because of it." "You chose responsibility," Eliza corrected. "You chose to fulfill your obligations as a duke, which is exactly what she would have expected you to do. Margaret wouldn't want you to torture yourself for being the man she married. Honorable, dutiful, committed to your role." "How can you be so certain?" Victor asked, looking at her with desperate hope. "Because I'm a woman," Eliza said simply, "and because I understand what it means to love someone. When you truly love someone, you want them to be true to themselves, to honor their commitments, to be the person you fell in love with. Margaret didn't fall in love with a man who would abandon his duties for her whims. She fell in love with the Duke of Ravenshollow with all that entailed." Victor stared at her for a long moment, and Eliza could see something shifting in his expression, a loosening of the rigid guilt that had held him captive for so long. "I never thought of it that way," he said slowly. "Because you've been too busy punishing yourself to think clearly," Eliza replied. "Victor, you've spent years believing that your grief makes you weak, that your pain dishonors Margaret's memory. But what if the opposite is true? What if your grief is proof of how deeply you loved her, and what if healing is the greatest tribute you could pay to that love?" "I don't know how to heal," Victor admitted. "I don't know how to stop hurting, how to stop seeing her face every time I close my eyes, how to stop feeling like I failed everyone who ever mattered to me." "You start by forgiving yourself," Eliza said. "You start by accepting that you're human, that you've made mistakes, that you've suffered losses that would break anyone. And then you start building something new, not to replace what you've lost, but to honor it." "And how do I do that?" Victor asked. "By being the man Margaret fell in love with," Eliza said. "By caring for your estate, your tenants, your responsibilities. By allowing yourself to form new connections, new friendships, new loves. By choosing to live instead of merely existing." Victor was quiet for a long time, and Eliza could see him wrestling with her words, trying to reconcile them with years of self-recrimination and despair. "It's not that simple," he said finally. "No," Eliza agreed. "It's not simple at all. It's probably the hardest thing you'll ever do. But Victor, you're already doing it. Every morning you get up instead of staying in bed. Every day you choose to engage with the world instead of hiding from it. Every time you smile or laugh or show kindness to someone else, you're choosing life over death, hope over despair. "I don't feel like I'm choosing anything," Victor said. "I feel like I'm just surviving." "Sometimes survival is enough," Eliza said gently. "Sometimes just getting through the day is an act of courage." "But Victor, you're doing more than surviving now. You're participating in life again, slowly and carefully, but genuinely. That's not nothing, that's everything." Victor looked at her with an expression that was part gratitude, part wonder. "How did you become so wise?" he asked. "I'm not wise," Eliza said with a small smile. "I'm just stubborn, and I refuse to give up on you, even when you've given up on yourself." "Why?" Victor asked. "Why do you care what happens to me? You barely know me, and what you do know isn't particularly admirable." Eliza considered her answer carefully, knowing that her words could either deepen their connection or drive him back into isolation. "Because I see who you really are," she said finally. "Beneath the grief and the guilt and the alcohol, I see a man who is fundamentally good. I see someone who cares deeply about others, who takes his responsibilities seriously, who is capable of great love and great kindness. I see the man your tenants remember, the man Margaret loved, the man you could be again if you gave yourself the chance." "And if you're wrong?" Victor asked. "If there's nothing left of that man?" "Then I'll love what's left," Eliza said simply, and realized as she spoke the words that they were true. "I'll love the broken pieces and help you put them back together in whatever way is possible." The admission hung in the air between them, more intimate than any physical touch. Victor stared at her with an expression of such vulnerability that Eliza felt her heart clench. "You said love," he whispered. "Yes," Eliza said, not backing down from the truth. "I did, but we barely know each other. We've been married less than 2 months, and most of that time I've been drunk or disagreeable or both." "Love doesn't always follow convenient timelines," Eliza said. "Sometimes it grows slowly, over years of shared experiences. Sometimes it strikes like lightning, and sometimes it develops gradually, day by day, as you come to know and appreciate someone's character." "Which is this?" Victor asked. "I don't know," Eliza admitted. "All I know is that when I look at you, I don't see a drunken duke or a failed husband or a disappointment to your family. I see a man who has suffered more than anyone should have to suffer, who has made mistakes but is trying to do better, who has the capacity for great goodness if he can just find his way back to it." Victor rose from his chair and moved to the window, staring out at the storm that still raged beyond the glass. "I don't know if I can be what you need me to be," he said quietly. "I don't need you to be anything other than yourself," Eliza replied. "Your real self, not the broken version you've been hiding behind. I need you to be honest with me, to trust me, to let me help you carry the burdens that have been crushing you for so long." "And in return?" Victor asked, turning back to face her. "In return, I'll stand by you through whatever comes. I'll be your partner in rebuilding what grief has torn down. I'll love you in whatever way you're able to accept, and I'll never give up on the possibility that someday you might be able to love me back." Victor crossed the room in 3 quick strides and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Eliza," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I don't deserve you. I don't deserve your patience or your kindness or your love, but I want to try to be worthy of them. I want to try to be the man you see when you look at me." "Then try," Eliza said, her eyes filling with tears. "That's all I'm asking. Just try." Victor brought her hands to his lips and kissed them gently. "I'll try," he promised. "God help me. I'll try to be better. For you, for myself, for everyone who depends on us." "And I'll help you," Eliza said. "Every step of the way, I'll be right beside you." They sat together in the firelight, hands clasped, hearts open, while the storm raged outside. It was a moment of perfect understanding, of connection that transcended the circumstances that had brought them together. For the first time since Margaret's death, Victor felt something other than pain when he thought about the future. And for the first time since arriving at Ravenshollow, Eliza felt truly hopeful about the life she was building with this complicated, damaged, extraordinary man. The storm broke the next morning, revealing a world transformed by snow and ice. But inside Ravenshollow Manor, a different kind of transformation was taking place. Slower, more subtle, but no less profound. 2 people who had been thrown together by circumstance were choosing to stay together by design, building something beautiful from the wreckage of their separate pasts. The healing spring came early to Ravenshollow that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal that seemed to permeate every aspect of life at the manor. Victor's improvement continued steadily, not without setbacks, but with a consistency that gave Eliza hope. He had reduced his drinking to a single glass of wine with dinner, and some days he abstained entirely. More importantly, he had begun to engage with life again in ways that went beyond mere survival. "The new plantings in the East Garden are coming along beautifully," Eliza reported, as they walked through the grounds on a warm April morning. "Mrs. Crawford says the kitchen staff are delighted to have fresh herbs again." "You've accomplished miracles," Victor said, looking around at the restored gardens with something approaching pride. "I had forgotten how beautiful this place could be." "It just needed attention," Eliza replied. "Like everything else around here." Victor caught the gentle implication and smiled. "Are you suggesting that I needed attention as well, Duchess?" "I'm suggesting that neglect is rarely the answer to anything," Eliza said diplomatically, "whether it's gardens or estates or people." They had reached the small family cemetery where generations of Harringtons lay buried beneath ancient yew trees. Victor's steps slowed as they approached Margaret's grave, marked by a simple white marble headstone that bore only her name and dates. "I used to come here every day," Victor said quietly. "In the beginning, after she died, I would sit by her grave for hours talking to her, begging her to forgive me for not being there when she needed me. And now?" Eliza asked gently. "Now I come once a week, on Sundays after church. I tell her about the estate, about the improvements you've made, about how different everything is now." He paused, looking at Eliza with an expression that was both grateful and slightly guilty. "I tell her about you." "What do you tell her?" Eliza asked, curious despite herself. "That you're nothing like her, but that you're exactly what I needed. That you've saved me from myself in ways I didn't think were possible. That I'm learning to live again, slowly and carefully, but genuinely." "And how do you think she feels about that?" Eliza asked. Victor was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I think she's relieved," he said finally. "I think she was tired of watching me destroy myself in her name. I think she wants me to be happy, even if that happiness comes from someone else." It was a profound shift from the guilt-ridden man who had been convinced that healing was a betrayal of his first wife's memory. Eliza felt a surge of pride in how far Victor had come and how much courage it had taken for him to reach this point. "Would you like to be alone with her for a few minutes?" Eliza offered. "No," Victor said, surprising her. "I'd like you to meet her properly." He moved to stand before the headstone, and Eliza followed, feeling slightly awkward but honored by his request. "Margaret," Victor said, his voice steady and clear. "This is Eliza, my wife. She's been taking care of me, and of Ravenshollow, and of everyone who depends on us. She's stubborn and brave and far too good for me, but she seems determined to stay anyway." He glanced at Eliza with a small smile. "I thought you should know that I'm going to be all right. We're going to be all right." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes at the simple ceremony, at the way Victor was formally introducing his past to his present, asking for his first wife's blessing on his second marriage. It was a gesture of respect for both women, and of his own growing ability to honor his grief without being consumed by it. "Thank you," she said softly, as they walked away from the cemetery. "For what?" "For including me in that. For letting me be part of your healing instead of just a witness to it." Victor stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Eliza, you're not just part of my healing. You are my healing. Without you, I would have drunk myself to death in that study, and Ravenshollow would have crumbled around me. You saved my life in every way that matters." "We saved each other," Eliza corrected. "I was as lost as you were, just in a different way. I had no purpose, no future, no hope of anything better than caring for aging parents and managing a declining household. You gave me a role, a home, a chance to make a difference." "And now?" Victor asked. "Are you happy here? Truly happy? Not just resigned to your fate?" Eliza looked around at the restored gardens, the well-maintained house, the thriving estate that had become her world. More importantly, she looked at the man beside her, no longer the broken, bitter duke she had married, but someone she had come to know and love deeply. "I'm happier than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. "This feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has. And you—" She paused, gathering her courage. "You feel like the other half of myself that I didn't know was missing." Victor's eyes darkened with emotion, and he reached out to cup her face gently in his hands. "I love you," he said simply. "I didn't think I was capable of loving anyone again, but you've proven me wrong about so many things. I love your strength, your compassion, your refusal to give up on lost causes. I love the way you've brought this place back to life, the way you've brought me back to life." "I love you too," Eliza whispered, her heart soaring at finally hearing the words she had hoped for but never dared to expect. "I love the man you are. the man you're becoming, the man you've always been underneath all the pain. Victor kissed her then, softly at first, then with growing passion, as months of careful restraint finally gave way to honest emotion. It was their first real kiss as husband and wife, their first acknowledgement that their marriage had become something far more than a business arrangement. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and slightly stunned by the intensity of their feelings. "I want to do this properly," Victor said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want to court you the way you deserve to be courted, to win your heart the way I should have from the beginning." "You already have my heart," Eliza said with a smile, "but I wouldn't object to being courted by my own husband." "Then prepare yourself, Duchess," Victor said, grinning with more genuine happiness than she had ever seen from him. "I intend to be very thorough in my courtship." True to his word, Victor embarked on a campaign to woo his own wife with all the charm and attention he should have shown her from the beginning. He brought her flowers from the garden each morning, wrote her poetry that made her laugh with its earnest awkwardness, and planned elaborate picnics in scenic spots around the estate. More importantly, he shared himself with her completely, his thoughts, his fears, his hopes for their future together. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, discovering shared interests and complementary differences that made their conversations endlessly fascinating. "I never knew you were interested in astronomy," Eliza said one evening as they lay on a blanket in the garden, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "Margaret and I used to do this," Victor said, then caught himself. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't." "Don't apologize," Eliza interrupted gently. "I want to know about the things that made you happy. I want to understand all the parts of your life, including the ones that came before me." "You're remarkable," Victor said, turning to look at her in the moonlight. "Most women would be jealous of their husband's first wife." "I'm not most women," Eliza replied. "And Margaret isn't my rival. She's part of your history, part of what made you the man I fell in love with. I can't be threatened by someone who helped shape you into the person I adore." Victor's response was to kiss her again, with a tenderness that spoke of deep gratitude and deeper love. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," he murmured against her lips. "You survived," Eliza said simply. "You endured more pain than anyone should have to bear, and you came out the other side still capable of love. That's not nothing, Victor. That's everything." As summer progressed, their relationship deepened into something that was both passionate and profoundly peaceful. They were partners in every sense of the word, managing the estate together, entertaining neighbors, supporting each other through the inevitable challenges of daily life. Victor's transformation was remarkable to witness. The bitter, broken man who had married her out of obligation had become someone confident, purposeful, and genuinely happy. He had regained the respect of his tenants, the friendship of his neighbors, and most importantly, his own self-respect. "You're different," Morrison, the estate steward, observed during one of their weekly meetings. "More like the man you used to be, but somehow better." "Better how?" Victor asked. "More human," Morrison said thoughtfully. "Before, you were a good duke, but a distant one. Now you're still a good duke, but you're also a man who understands suffering, who has compassion for others who struggle. It makes you a better leader." Victor shared Morrison's observation with Eliza that evening as they walked through the village, acknowledging the greetings of people who had once avoided him. "He's right," Eliza agreed. "Your pain has made you more empathetic, more understanding of human frailty. You're not the same man you were before Margaret's death, but you're not the broken man you became afterward either. You're someone new, someone who has been tested and emerged stronger. Someone who has been loved back to life," Victor corrected, taking her hand in his. "I couldn't have done this alone, Eliza. I wouldn't have wanted to try." "You didn't have to do it alone," Eliza said. "That's what marriage is. Two people helping each other become the best versions of themselves." As they reached the manor house, Victor stopped and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Eliza," he said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Of course. Are you truly happy? Not just content, not just resigned to your circumstances, but genuinely happy with the life we've built together." Eliza looked at him, this man who had become her partner, her best friend, her greatest love, and felt her heart overflow with certainty. "I'm happier than I ever dreamed possible," she said. "When I was given to you to pay my family's debts, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning. You've given me purpose, adventure, love, and a home where I truly belong. How could I be anything but happy?" Victor's smile was radiant as he swept her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. "Then we've both won," he said, as he set her down. Two people who were supposed to be each other's punishment have become each other's salvation. The best kind of love story, Eliza agreed, standing on her toes to kiss him. The kind that proves that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most unlikely soil. As they walked into their home together, hand in hand, Eliza reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. She had been given to a drunken duke to pay her family's debts, expecting nothing but misery and degradation. Instead, she had found love, purpose, and a partnership that had transformed them both. The woman who had been sacrificed to settle a debt had discovered that sometimes the most valuable things cannot be bought or sold. They can only be earned through patience, courage, and the willingness to see past surface appearances to the truth beneath. And sometimes, if you're very brave and very lucky, that truth turns out to be more beautiful than any fairy tale ever written. The legacy of love. 2 years later, the christening of James Victor Harrington, heir to the Duke of Ravenshollow, was held on a perfect September morning in the same small church where his parents had been married 3 years earlier. The ceremony was a far cry from the cheerless wedding that had united Victor and Eliza. This was a celebration attended by friends, neighbors, and tenants who had watched the transformation of both the Duke and his estate with wonder and approval. Eliza stood beside the font, holding their son, a healthy, beautiful baby with Victor's dark hair and her hazel eyes, while Victor's hand rested protectively on her shoulder. The sight of her husband cradling their child with such tender care never failed to move her. This was the same man who had once been convinced he was incapable of love, now devoted utterly to his wife and son. "James Victor Harrington," the vicar intoned, "I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit." As the holy water touched their baby's forehead, James let out a small cry of protest that made the congregation chuckle. Victor immediately leaned down to soothe him with gentle words, his transformation from bitter recluse to devoted father complete and remarkable. After the ceremony, they hosted a celebration at the manor that would have been impossible during Victor's dark years. The house was filled with laughter, conversation, and the kind of warm hospitality that had once been Ravenshollow's hallmark. Eliza moved through the rooms, accepting congratulations and watching with deep satisfaction as Victor engaged easily with their guests, no longer the withdrawn, hostile man she had married. "Your Grace," said Lady Pemberton, one of their nearest neighbours, "you must be so proud. The Duke has become quite the model of domestic happiness." "Indeed he has," Eliza agreed, watching Victor across the room as he discussed estate matters with several local gentlemen. "Though I think he always had it in him. He just needed the right circumstances to bring it out." "And you provided those circumstances," Lady Pemberton said with a knowing smile. "The transformation has been remarkable to witness. 3 years ago, no one would have believed that the Duke of Ravenshollow could become such a devoted husband and father." "Love has a way of surprising us," Eliza replied diplomatically, though privately she agreed with the assessment. Victor's capacity for happiness had been buried under years of grief and guilt, but it had never been truly lost. Later that evening, after the last guests had departed and James had been settled in the nursery, Victor and Eliza walked through their gardens in the soft twilight. The grounds that had once been overgrown and neglected now bloomed with careful cultivation, a visible symbol of the renewal that had taken place at Ravenshollow. "A successful day," Victor observed, his arm around Eliza's waist as they paused beside the fountain that had been restored to working order. "Very successful," Eliza agreed. "James was perfectly behaved, the weather was beautiful, and you charmed everyone present. I'm particularly proud of how you handled Lord Westbrook's questions about the new drainage project." "I had an excellent teacher," Victor said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You've made me remember what it means to be a proper duke, to care about the people who depend on us." "You never forgot," Eliza corrected. "You just lost sight of it for a while. There's a difference." They had reached the small family cemetery, where fresh flowers now adorned Margaret's grave, placed there by Victor during his weekly visits, but no longer with the desperate grief that had once characterized his mourning. "I told her about the christening," Victor said quietly, "about how beautiful James is, how proud we are of him, how happy we are together. I think she would have liked to see it." "I think she would have been very happy for you," Eliza said, "for all of us." "Do you ever regret it?" Victor asked suddenly. "The way we came together? The circumstances that brought you here? Do you ever wonder what your life might have been like if your father hadn't gambled away the family fortune?" Eliza considered the question seriously, as she always did when Victor asked about her feelings regarding their unusual beginning. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted, "but I can't imagine any other path leading to this kind of happiness. If my father hadn't lost everything, I would probably be a spinster governess somewhere, caring for other people's children instead of my own. I would never have met you, never have had the chance to help restore this beautiful place, never have experienced the kind of love we share, even though you were essentially sold to pay a debt, Victor pressed. Even though you had no choice in the matter. I had choices, Eliza said firmly. I could have been bitter and resentful. I could have made both our lives miserable. I could have given up and accepted defeat. Instead, I chose to see possibility where others saw only problems. I chose to fight for our marriage instead of simply enduring it. And I'm grateful every day that you made those choices, Victor said, stopping to face her in the moonlight. You saved me, Eliza. Not just from the drinking, not just from the despair, but from a life of meaningless existence. You gave me purpose again, hope again, love again. We saved each other, Eliza replied, as she always did when he spoke of salvation. I was as lost as you were, just in a different way. We found each other at exactly the right moment, when we both needed saving. Victor cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle and reverent. I love you, he said simply, more than I ever thought possible, more than I have words to express. You are my heart, my hope, my home. And you are mine, Eliza replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. My unexpected gift, my greatest blessing, my proof that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most unlikely beginnings. As they walked back toward the house, their home glowing with warm light in the darkness, Eliza reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect contentment. She had been given to a drunken duke to pay her family's debts, expecting nothing but misery and degradation. Instead, she had found love, purpose, and a partnership that had transformed them both in ways neither could have imagined. The manor that had once echoed with emptiness now rang with laughter and life. The estate that had been neglected was now thriving. The man who had been drowning in grief had learned to swim in the waters of new love, and the woman who had been sacrificed to settle a debt had discovered that sometimes the most valuable things cannot be bought or sold. They can only be earned through patience, courage, and the willingness to see past surface appearances to the truth beneath. In the nursery, baby James slept peacefully in his cradle, unaware that his very existence was proof of his parents' triumph over circumstances that could have destroyed them. He would grow up in a house filled with love, on an estate managed with care and wisdom, surrounded by parents who had learned that the strongest foundations are built not on convenience or social expectation, but on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the kind of deep affection that can weather any storm. As Victor and Eliza prepared for bed, they could hear the gentle sounds of their son's breathing through the connecting door to the nursery. It was a sound that represented everything they had built together: hope, love, continuity, and the promise of a future that neither had dared to dream when they first met as reluctant strangers bound together by debt and duty. What are you thinking about? Victor asked, noticing Eliza's contemplative expression as she brushed her hair. About how strange life is, she replied, how the things that seem like disasters at the time can turn out to be the greatest blessings, how the people who seem least suited for each other can become perfect partners. How love can grow in the most unlikely soil if it's tended with patience and care. Are you writing a philosophy book, Duchess? Victor teased, coming to stand behind her and taking the brush from her hands. Perhaps I should, Eliza said with a smile. I could call it How to Transform a Drunken Duke, a practical guide for unwilling wives. Victor laughed, the sound rich and warm and completely free of the bitterness that had once characterized his humor. I'm not sure there would be much of a market for such a book. You'd be surprised, Eliza said. I suspect there are more women than you might think who find themselves married to difficult men and wondering if change is possible. And what would your advice be? Victor asked, beginning to brush her hair with gentle strokes. Patience, Eliza said immediately. Courage, the willingness to see past the surface to the person underneath, and above all the understanding that you can't change someone who doesn't want to change. You can only love them enough to make them want to change themselves. Wise words, Victor murmured, setting down the brush and wrapping his arms around her from behind, though I would add one more piece of advice, which is, choose your battles carefully. Some things are worth fighting for, and some things are worth fighting against. The trick is knowing the difference. And what was worth fighting for in our case? Eliza asked, leaning back against his chest. Us, Victor said simply. The possibility of us, even when it seemed impossible. The hope that two broken people could heal each other, even when everyone else had given up on both of us. And what was worth fighting against? Despair, resignation, the belief that some things are too damaged to be repaired, that some people are too lost to be found. Victor pressed a kiss to the top of her head. You taught me that nothing is irredeemable if you're willing to put in the work to redeem it. As they settled into bed together, Eliza marveled once again at the transformation of the man beside her. The bitter, broken Duke who had married her out of obligation had become someone confident, loving, and genuinely happy. More importantly, he had become her partner in every sense of the word, sharing not just her bed and her name, but her dreams, her hopes, and her vision for their future together. Victor, she said softly in the darkness, do you ever think about what we'll tell James about how we met, about the circumstances that brought us together? I think we'll tell him the truth, Victor replied. That sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most unlikely circumstances, that his parents found each other at a time when both needed saving, and that they chose to save each other instead of giving up. And if he asks whether we were happy about the arrangement at first, we'll tell him that happiness isn't always immediate, but it's always possible if you're willing to work for it. We'll tell him that the best things in life often come disguised as problems, and that the greatest gifts are often the ones we don't think we want. Eliza smiled in the darkness, thinking about their son sleeping peacefully in the next room, about the estate thriving under their joint care, about the love that had grown from the most unpromising beginnings into something stronger and more beautiful than either of them had ever imagined possible. The woman who had been given to a drunken duke to pay her family's debts had discovered that sometimes the most valuable transactions are the ones that seem like losses at first glance. She had been traded for money, but she had gained love, purpose, and a home where she truly belonged. And the Duke, who had been drowning in grief and guilt, had learned that salvation sometimes comes in the most unexpected packages, in the form of a stubborn, brave, loving woman who refuses to give up on lost causes and who sees possibilities where others see only problems. Together they had proven that love can indeed conquer all, not through magic or miracles, but through patience, understanding, and the daily choice to see the best in each other, even when that best is buried beneath layers of pain and disappointment. Their story would become a legend in the county, the tale of the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshollow who had transformed tragedy into triumph, despair into hope, and a marriage of convenience into a love affair for the ages. But for Victor and Eliza, it was simply their life, imperfect, challenging, but infinitely precious, because they had built it together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. From debt payment to devoted love, this is the story that proves the most unlikely beginnings can create the most beautiful endings. If you believe that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our worst problems, like this incredible transformation, don't forget to subscribe for more breathtaking historical romances that show us redemption is always possible when two hearts choose to heal together. Share in the comments, which moment touched you most? The storm confession or the christening celebration? Let's celebrate love stories that remind us that sometimes being given away leads to finding exactly where you belong.